Imagine you're playing a high school basketball game. You're running up and down the court, you're shooting hoops, having no problem whatsoever, just like every single basketball game you've played your entire life. The game ends, you go into the locker room, you begin to shower, you change, and you go out waiting for the bus, and suddenly you can't breathe anymore. This is word for word what happened to me on February 4th, 2014. You might not have ever had an experience like this, and for your sake, I hope you never do. But after listening to this speech, you might begin to realize how often that we take things in our lives for granted. Today I'm going to talk about my first ever surgical experience. Specifically, I'm going to talk about my first experience in a surgery and in the hospital, and then how that event changed my life and how I have the values that I do today. This event marked the first time I'd ever had surgery, let alone stayed in a hospital. I'd always thought I was this perfectly healthy girl with no problems whatsoever, and that I'd never be that statistic that ends up in the hospital for no apparent reason, and you're just that sick person. But that changed for me within minutes. I had just finished playing a basketball game in Hatton, North Dakota. We went into the locker room, had our talk, showered, changed, and we were waiting to board the bus, when suddenly I had very sharp pain in my chest. I thought it was heartburn, so I just waited for it to go away, took some Advil, but it didn't go away. It actually began to make it very difficult for me to expand my chest and breathe. So once we got home off the bus, we headed to the emergency room in Hillsboro, and the doctors took some x-rays and said that I had just had some inflammation in my chest. So they sent me home with a prescription for Aleve, and then I went to sleep. I woke up at about 1 a.m. with my mom and dad coming in saying that I needed to be rushed down to Fargo because a radiologist looked at my x-rays saying that something was wrong. So we went down to Fargo and they took more tests and they found out that I had a collapsed lung. That somehow my lung had popped and that air was somehow leaking into my chest cavity. So they did a small procedure, put me to sleep, and put a small tube in my chest and sent me home for a couple days. I came back and found out that the tube hadn't worked and that there was still a hole with air leaking out in my chest. So they hooked me up to suction, which was like a small vacuum in the wall, up to my chest to get rid of the air, and then had me stay overnight. The next morning I woke up and told me I needed surgery, so they prepped me for surgery, and the last thing I remember is scooting onto the surgical table and laying out my arm, and that's the last thing I remember. When I woke up, there was a tube about this thick sitting out of my chest that was draining this orange fluid from my chest that looked to be like blood coming out of my chest, so I was terrified after seeing that. They said that they had gone in and made 3 small incisions about an inch long each, and they had gone in with a camera in one hole and then an instrument in another and had clipped out the bad part of my lung and then somehow stapled my lung back together. I ended up making a full recovery, and then actually within 4 days I got to go home. So this experience was very scary for me, considering it's my first one that I've ever had. Now that you know now that you know more about to say about my experience I had in the hospital, this can kind of help you to understand why this shaped my life. Ever since that day that I did come home, I began to realize that I am very lucky being in the situation I have and how many opportunities I've had, and that I have been healthy up until that point, and that I realized that I do take a lot of aspects in my life for granted. So I thought about how lucky I've been and that somehow my attitude needed to change about that. So that's what I did. I changed my attitude towards my life and began to realize that not everything is guaranteed. You can't take things like that for granted. So I started to do the cliche thing and live my life to the fullest and take every minute and be thankful for it, because there are other people out there who aren't nearly as lucky as we are. It was really a turning point in my life, and this was only a year ago, and I've been very happy ever since. Today I gave you a closer look about my experiences in the hospital and how that helped me to shape me into the person I am today. I talked to you about that first hospital stay and surgery experience and how that helped me to turn me into the person that I am today. Now I hope that you can see why I am the way that I am and why I have some of those certain values in my life.